So, welcome to part 2 of risk and return. Here we're going to look at portfolios and we're going to calculate the return and the variance and standard deviation of the portfolios. What is a portfolio? Well, a portfolio is a combination of assets. That's all it is, really. Each asset's return contributes to the overall return of the portfolio, and that can be calculated as a simple weighted average. However, the risk contribution is a bit more complicated, and it's not a linear weighted average. Let's look at and revisit the assets we have from the last presentation, X and Y, with X having a return of expected return of 7.8% and Y 6.2%. Now we're investing $1,500 in X and $2,500 in Y, which means our total investment is $4,000. So what is the expected return of our portfolio? Well, it can be directly calculated. So if we have an expected return of 7.8% on $1,500, we can just multiply that and say our expected return is $117 for X, and multiplying 2,500 by 6.2, we have $155 for Y. So our total expected return would be $272. That's shown, calculated as follows. And that means we can now calculate as a percentage what the return would be by seeing this $272 expected return divided by the $4,000 of investment, which would result in 6.8%. So similarly to the weighted average used for calculating the expected return, the portfolio expected return is also a weighted average, and we can calculate it as such. So what we can do here, instead of going with the direct calculation that we just did, we can take the 1,500 out of 4,000, which means we have 37.5% of our portfolio invested in asset X. And in the case of Y, we have 2,500 out of 4,000, so we have 62.5% of our assets of our portfolio invested in Y. So the total volume, of course, is 100% of the portfolio. Now we can take a look and calculate the weight times the expected return for that portion of the portfolio. So then we multiply 37.5 times 7, we get 2.925, 62.5 times 6.2 gets us 3.875, and we can add the two of them. So the expected return for the portfolio is just the addition of those two expected values, and we end up again with the 6.8. Calculating variance and standard deviation. Well, to do that, we have to calculate the portfolio return using the weighted averages, but now for each of the scenarios we had. So we had, in the last presentation, we had the slowdown, normal, and the growth scenario. We had the expected returns for each of the stocks under the various cases, and that gave us, we calculated the 7.8 and the 6.2. We will now have to calculate the portfolio return under the three scenarios. We already know the answer here would be 6.8. So what we do is you would take 37.5%, that's the proportion we have in X, multiply it by minus 3%, and take the 62.5 multiplied by the 8%, and that would give us, under this slowdown scenario, a return of 3.875 for the portfolio. Then we would just basically do the same thing with the others. So we would take 37.5 times 9, 62.5 times 6. Okay, so that would happen with the rest. That would give us our portfolio returns under these three scenarios, and it would be as well, we would have our average, our expected value. Now we can then calculate the standard deviation, or rather the variance initially, the same way we did with any kind of a share. So all it is, it's the probability of the one outcome times the return minus the expected return square, and we do that for all three scenarios, and that would give us our variance, which would be 0.000255. Taking the square root of that is again 0.01592, or 1.592%. And that's how we calculate the standard deviation. Thanks for listening, and hope that helped.